Jessica Carter moved through the grand mansion with the practiced quiet of someone used to being unseen. Her footsteps barely echoed on the marble floors as she dusted the bookshelves in the study. The Montgomery estate was a world of polished wood, gleaming crystal, and whispers of wealth that seemed to suffocate anyone who didn't belong. Jessica belonged to the shadows, a cleaner with no family, no past, and seemingly no future. Jessica, you missed a spot, one of the other staff said sharply, pointing to the corner of the room. Yes, of course. Sorry, Jessica replied, lowering her gaze. She had learned long ago that it was better not to argue. After finishing her assigned tasks, she entered the study to clean up. The room smelled of leather and cigar smoke, and the massive oak desk was covered in stacks of papers and files. As she reached to straighten a precarious pile of documents, a few slipped from the top. Careful, Jess, she muttered to herself, bending to pick them up. Her eyes caught on a page filled with numbers and unfamiliar terms. She didn't mean to linger, but something felt off. The totals in one column didn't match those in another. A single line was marked with a red pen, yet it didn't fit with the rest of the notes. Jessica frowned. Probably nothing, she told herself, yet her fingers hesitated as she placed the papers back on the desk. The sound of a door opening startled her. Jessica turned to see William Montgomery himself walk into the room. The man was every bit as imposing as his reputation, a tall figure in a tailored suit with piercing eyes that seemed to assess everyone he met. He paused, looking surprised to see her still there. Miss Carter, isn't it? He said, his voice smooth but distant. Yes, sir, she replied, keeping her gaze down. You're here late. Just finishing up, sir. She debated whether to say anything about the papers, but decided against it. What would someone like him care about the opinion of a cleaner? He nodded and moved to his desk. Jessica grabbed her cleaning supplies and prepared to leave, but as she passed him, she blurted out, Excuse me, Mr. Montgomery. William looked up, eyebrows raised. Yes, she hesitated, clutching the cleaning cloth tightly. I couldn't help but notice something strange in one of your documents. He frowned, his expression turning cold. Strange? What do you mean? Jessica took a deep breath. There were numbers that didn't add up. I didn't mean to look, but they seemed wrong. William's eyes narrowed. For a moment, she thought he might reprimand her for overstepping. Instead, he gestured to the desk. Show me. Jessica approached hesitantly, pointing to the document in question. Here, this figure doesn't match this one. And the note here. I see it, William interrupted, his voice tight. He scanned the page, his expression darkening with each second. Jessica shifted nervously. I'm sorry if I... No, he said sharply, looking up at her. Don't apologize. You might have just uncovered something important. His intensity startled her. I wasn't trying to. I know, he said, his tone softer now. Thank you for pointing this out. You've done more than most people in this house would. Jessica wasn't sure how to respond. She had never been thanked by someone like him before. As she gathered her supplies and headed for the door, she heard him murmur, almost to himself, who would have thought a cleaner could see what everyone else missed? Jessica paused but said nothing. Closing the door behind her, she couldn't shake the feeling that her small observation had set something significant in motion. The morning sun streamed through the high windows of the Montgomery mansion, but Jessica Carter barely noticed it as she paced the small servants' quarters. Her heart raced with indecision. What had she gotten herself into? The memory of William Montgomery's intense expression from the night before still lingered in her mind. She had only meant to help, but what if she'd overstepped? What if she'd caused trouble for herself? No, she muttered aloud, shaking her head. It's not my business. He probably forgot about it already. But deep down, Jessica knew that wasn't true. Something about the way he reacted told her that the issue was serious, possibly even dangerous. Before she could overthink any further, a knock came at her door. Startled, she opened it to find Thomas, the butler, standing there with his usual air of professionalism. Mr. Montgomery would like to see you in his study, he said, his tone giving nothing away. Jessica's stomach dropped. Did he say why? No, Thomas replied, stepping aside to let her pass. But I wouldn't keep him waiting. The walk to the study felt like an eternity. Each step echoed in her ears as if the mansion itself were amplifying her anxiety. When she reached the door, she hesitated before knocking softly. Come in, came William's voice, firm and authoritative. Jessica pushed the door open and stepped inside. William was seated behind his massive desk, his expression unreadable as he gestured for her to sit. Miss Carter, he began, leaning forward slightly. I've spent most of the night reviewing the documents you brought to my attention. Jessica's mouth went dry. I didn't mean to. He held up a hand to stop her. Let me finish. You were right. The numbers didn't add up, and the discrepancies weren't small. They were deliberate. Her eyes widened. Deliberate? You mean, yes, he said grimly. Someone in my company has been siphoning money, and they were careful to hide it. If you hadn't noticed that error, it might have gone undetected until it was too late. Jessica blinked, unable to process the gravity of his words. I just thought it looked strange. I didn't think it was anything that serious. William sat back in his chair, studying her. Most people wouldn't have noticed, and even if they did, they wouldn't have said anything. What made you speak up? Jessica hesitated, unsure how to answer. I guess I just thought it was the right thing to do. He nodded slowly. The right thing to do, he repeated, almost to himself. Then, to her surprise, he stood and walked around the desk, stopping just a few feet from her. I owe you a debt of gratitude, Miss Carter, he said, his voice softer now. You've saved my company, possibly my reputation. Jessica shook her head, feeling overwhelmed. I didn't do anything special. You did more than you know, he interrupted, his gaze intense, and I need your help to figure out who's behind this. Her heart skipped a beat. My help? But I'm just a cleaner. I don't know anything about. You saw what no one else did, he said firmly. That tells me you have a sharp eye and a good head on your shoulders. I can't trust anyone else right now. Whoever did this is close to me, someone with access to sensitive information. Jessica stared at him, her mind racing. This was far beyond anything she'd ever imagined. Could she really help him? Or was this a mistake? I don't know, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't think I'm the right person for this. William's expression softened, and he gave her a reassuring smile. You don't have to make a decision right now. But think about it. Sometimes, the people who think they're the least important are the ones who can make the biggest difference. The weight of his words stayed with her long after she left the study. As she returned to her cleaning duties, Jessica couldn't help but wonder if her life was about to change forever. The office was eerily quiet, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Jessica sat nervously in a chair across from William Montgomery, who leaned over his desk, shuffling through stacks of documents. His usually composed demeanor was replaced with tension, his sharp features shadowed by the dim light of the desk lamp. I've gone through every account, William said, breaking the silence. The discrepancies lead back to one person. Jessica leaned forward, hesitant but curious. Who? William sighed heavily, meeting her gaze. Nathan Sterling, my business partner, someone I trusted with everything. Jessica's eyes widened. She had overheard the staff speak of Nathan, a suave, charismatic man who often visited the mansion. Are you sure it's him? William tapped the papers on his desk. The evidence is overwhelming. He's been diverting funds through shell companies for months, possibly longer. It's not just theft, it's betrayal. Jessica felt a pang of unease. What are you going to do? I'll confront him, of course, William replied, his tone colder now. But I need to be careful. Nathan isn't the type to go down without a fight. Jessica hesitated, her voice soft. What if he denies it? William's jaw tightened. He will. Men like him always do. That's why I need more than these numbers. I need proof, something undeniable. Jessica's stomach churned at the thought. How can I help? William looked at her, his expression a mixture of determination and something softer, gratitude, perhaps. You've already done more than I could ask, Miss Carter. But if you're willing, I need someone who can keep their eyes open, someone no one would suspect. You mean, spy on him? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. William hesitated. Not exactly, but if you notice anything, documents, conversations, anything out of place, I need to know. This is bigger than you or me, Jessica. If Nathan gets away with this, it could destroy not only my company, but the livelihoods of everyone who works for me. Jessica swallowed hard. The weight of his words settled on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. I'll do what I can. William nodded. Thank you. The next few days passed in a blur. Jessica continued her work as usual, but every step she took in the mansion felt heavier. She couldn't help but notice Nathan's sudden frequent visits. He strolled through the house as if he owned it, his charming smile masking whatever secrets he carried. One afternoon, Jessica found herself cleaning near the library when she overheard voices. Peering around the corner, she saw Nathan and William in a heated discussion. "You're accusing me?" Nathan's voice was smooth, but there was an edge to it. "I'm asking questions," William replied, his tone measured but firm. "These transactions don't add up, Nathan. I want to believe you had nothing to do with it." Nathan laughed, though it sounded forced. "William, you're paranoid. You've been working too hard. These are routine transactions, complex, yes, but nothing illegal." "I hope you're right," William said, his eyes narrowing. "Because if you're not, I'll find out." Jessica's heart raced as Nathan stormed out of the room, his face a mask of controlled anger. She quickly ducked into a nearby alcove, holding her breath as he passed. The look in his eyes chilled her. He knew he was being watched. Later that evening, Jessica couldn't shake her unease. She found herself back in the study, where William sat poring over yet another stack of documents. He looked up as she entered, his expression softening slightly. "Jessica," he said, setting the papers aside. "What is it?" "I think Nathan knows," she said quietly, closing the door behind her. "I overheard your conversation. He's angry." William nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "He'll retaliate. People like him always do when they're cornered." "What can we do?" Jessica asked, her voice barely above a whisper. William leaned forward, his expression intense. "We keep going. We find the proof we need, and when the time comes, we make sure he has nowhere to run." Jessica nodded, her resolve hardening. For the first time, she felt not like an outsider, but an ally, someone William truly trusted. Whatever came next, she was ready to face it. Jessica stood at the edge of the mansion's grand foyer, clutching her cleaning supplies. The events of the past week had left her reeling. She was no longer just a cleaner. She had become entangled in William Montgomery's battle against betrayal. Now, every glance from the other staff seemed to linger a second too long. Every whispered conversation felt like it was about her. The air was thick with suspicion. "Miss Carter." William's voice echoed from the top of the sweeping staircase, snapping her out of her thoughts. He descended swiftly, his polished shoes clicking against the marble. His expression was as serious as ever. "Yes, Mr. Montgomery?" Jessica replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Follow me to the study. There's something we need to discuss," he said, already turning toward the hallway. Jessica's stomach churned as she followed him. The study was becoming an all too familiar place, a room where life seemed to change with every conversation. William closed the door behind her and gestured for her to sit. "You've done a lot for me in the past few days," he began, leaning against the edge of his desk. "More than anyone else in this house, frankly." "I was just doing what I thought was right," Jessica said, her voice quiet. "And that's exactly why I need you to do more," he replied. His intense gaze locked onto hers. "I've been thinking. You have a sharp eye, Jessica. You notice things most people miss. I could use that skill in a more formal capacity." Jessica blinked, confused. "I'm not sure I understand." "I want you to be my assistant," he said plainly. "You'd help me with documents, schedules, and anything else that requires a discerning eye. Of course, it would come with a significant pay raise." Jessica's mouth went dry. She couldn't imagine herself in such a role. "But I don't have the skills for that. I'm just a—" "Stop," William interrupted, his tone firm but not unkind. "You're more than just anything, Jessica. You've already proven that. I don't trust anyone else right now, and I need someone I can rely on. That's you." Her mind raced. She could barely believe what she was hearing. "What about the others? The staff, the people in your office? They'll think I don't belong." "Let them think what they want," William said, his voice laced with determination. "You've earned this, Jessica. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." She hesitated, looking down at her hands. "It's a big responsibility." "Life is full of responsibilities," he replied, stepping closer. "The question is, are you ready to take them on?" Jessica met his gaze, the weight of his words settling over her. Slowly, she nodded. "I'll try." A rare smile flickered across William's face. "That's all I ask." The next day, Jessica arrived at the Montgomery Bank headquarters, a towering building in the heart of the city. The receptionist gave her a puzzled look when she introduced herself, but a quick phone call to William cleared up any confusion. "This way," the receptionist said curtly, leading Jessica to a sleek office. Mr. Montgomery will meet you here. Jessica stepped inside, her heart pounding. The room was spacious, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city skyline. She barely had time to take it all in before William entered, carrying a stack of files. "Welcome to your new role," he said, setting the files on the desk. "Ready for your first task?" Jessica swallowed her nerves and nodded. "What do you need me to do?" "These are the last few months of financial reports," he explained. "I need you to comb through them and flag anything suspicious. Take your time, but be thorough." Jessica sat down, her hands trembling slightly as she opened the first file. The numbers blurred together at first, but as she focused, patterns began to emerge. Hours passed, and Jessica barely noticed the time until William returned. "Find anything?" he asked. She looked up, exhaustion etched on her face. "A few things that don't add up. Here and here." She pointed to specific entries, explaining her findings. William's expression shifted from curiosity to admiration. "You're a natural." Jessica flushed under his praise, but felt a spark of pride. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was more than just an invisible part of the world around her. By the end of the day, Jessica's head was spinning, but her determination only grew stronger. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, earning the respect of William's colleagues, unraveling the web of deceit Nathan Sterling had woven. But for the first time, she felt like she had a purpose. As she left the office that evening, she glanced up at the illuminated sign of Montgomery Bank. Her life had changed in ways she couldn't have imagined, and she had no idea what the future held. But one thing was certain: she was ready to face it. Jessica adjusted her chair, the soft hum of the office air conditioning the only sound as she flipped through another stack of reports. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above her, and the glow of the city skyline outside the large windows cast long shadows across the room. She had spent the last few days immersed in numbers, decoding the tangled mess of Nathan Sterling's schemes. Her new role was overwhelming, but she was determined to prove herself. Just as she reached for her pen to jot down another anomaly, the intercom on her desk buzzed. Startled, she pressed the button. "Miss Carter," William's voice came through, calm but with a hint of urgency. "Can you come to my office?" "On my way," she replied, quickly gathering her notes. When she stepped into William's office, he was standing by the window, his silhouette outlined by the twinkling lights of the city. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Jessica," he began, motioning for her to close the door. "I need you to be honest with me. Have you noticed anything unusual recently?" Jessica frowned. "Unusual? You mean in the reports?" "No," William said, stepping closer. "I mean outside of work. Has anyone contacted you, approached you, or made you feel unsafe?" Jessica's heart skipped a beat. She thought back to the past few days. Nothing specific came to mind, but she had felt a lingering unease, as if someone was watching her. She shook her head. "No, nothing like that. Why?" William's jaw tightened. He handed her a small envelope. "This was delivered to the office this morning. It's addressed to you." Jessica opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a single piece of paper, typed in bold letters: "Stay out of what doesn't concern you, or you'll regret it." Her breath caught. "Who sent this?" William crossed his arms, his gaze hard. "We don't know yet. My security team is investigating, but I have a strong suspicion this is Nathan's doing. He knows you've been helping me." Jessica felt a wave of fear, but she forced herself to stay calm. "What should I do?" "You're not to go anywhere alone," William said firmly. "My driver will take you to and from work. I've also arranged for security to be stationed near your apartment." "That's not necessary," Jessica protested. "I don't want to make a big deal out of this." William's expression darkened. "It is a big deal, Jessica. Nathan Sterling isn't just a thief. He's dangerous. If he feels cornered, he'll lash out, and I won't let you become a target because of me." Jessica swallowed hard, nodding. "Okay, thank you." That evening, Jessica left the office under the watchful eye of a security guard. As the sleek black car pulled up to her apartment building, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She scanned the street, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Still, the note was a constant weight in her mind. Inside her apartment, she double-checked the locks before collapsing onto the couch. The day's events played over and over in her head. How had her life become so complicated? She had gone from cleaning floors to uncovering corporate fraud and receiving threats, all in a matter of weeks. Her phone buzzed, breaking her thoughts. She glanced at the screen. It was a message from William. "Let me know if you need anything. You're not alone in this." Jessica exhaled slowly, a small wave of comfort washing over her. She typed back, "Thank you. I'll be careful." The next day at the office, Jessica was on edge. Every glance from a coworker felt suspicious. Every unfamiliar face seemed like a threat. At lunch, she stayed in her office, nervously eating a sandwich as she pored over more documents. Her focus was broken by a knock at the door. It was one of the junior accountants, Megan, holding a cup of coffee. "Hey, Jessica," Megan said with a friendly smile. "I thought you might need a pick-me-up. You've been working so hard lately." Jessica managed a smile. "Thanks, Megan. That's kind of you." As Megan left, Jessica caught sight of something outside her office, a man in a gray suit lingering near the elevators. He wasn't a familiar face, and something about him felt off. She watched as he glanced around, his hand resting on his phone as if waiting for someone. Jessica's pulse quickened. She quickly stood and headed for William's office. Bursting in, she found him mid-conversation with one of his advisors. "Jessica?" he said, surprised. "What's wrong?" "There's a man near the elevators," she said quickly. "I don't recognize him, and he looks suspicious." William's expression hardened. He immediately picked up his desk phone. "Security, I need someone to check the elevators. Now." Minutes later, the man was escorted out of the building. William returned to his office, his face grim. He claimed to be a courier, but his story didn't check out. "My guess is he was sent by Nathan to spy on us." Jessica sank into a chair, her heart pounding. "This is getting worse, isn't it?" William nodded, his jaw set. "Yes, but we're not backing down. Nathan wants to intimidate us, but he doesn't realize we're one step ahead." Jessica met his gaze, a newfound resolve sparking within her. "What's our next move?" William leaned forward, a glint of determination in his eyes. "We hit him where it hurts, and we make sure he has nowhere to hide." Jessica walked into William's office the next morning, clutching her notebook tightly. The tension in the room was palpable. William stood by the window, his back to her, his phone pressed to his ear. His voice was low and sharp, cutting through the silence like a blade. "I don't care what it takes. Find something concrete. I want his operation dismantled," he snapped before ending the call. Jessica cleared her throat. "Mr. Montgomery?" William turned, his face softening slightly when he saw her. "Jessica, come in. There's something I need to show you." He motioned for her to follow him to a hidden cabinet built into the wall. With a twist of a key, the cabinet opened, revealing a safe. He punched in a code, and the door swung open to reveal stacks of files, some yellowed with age, others fresh and neatly labeled. "What is this?" Jessica asked, her curiosity piqued. "This," William said, pulling out a thick file, "is the history of Nathan Sterling's involvement in my company. I've had suspicions about him for years, but I never had enough proof to act. Now, thanks to you, I do." Jessica took the file and flipped it open, scanning pages filled with contracts, memos, and financial records. Her eyes widened as she began to see the extent of Nathan's deceit. "He's been stealing from you for this long?" she asked, incredulous. "Yes," William said bitterly. "And not just me. He's exploited clients, investors, even charities. He's a parasite." Jessica's stomach churned. "So what's the plan?" William's eyes hardened. "We're going to expose him. Publicly. But first, we need one more piece of evidence. Something so damning that he won't be able to talk his way out of it." That evening, Jessica found herself poring over another stack of documents in her small apartment. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. She froze, her heart racing. No one ever visited her. Cautiously, she approached the door and peeked through the peephole. A security guard, one of William's men, stood on the other side. "Miss Carter," he said when she opened the door. "Mr. Montgomery sent me to ensure you're safe. He also asked me to deliver this." The guard handed her a small, unmarked envelope. Jessica thanked him and closed the door, her hands trembling as she opened it. Inside was a USB drive and a note. "Jessica, this is the final piece of the puzzle. Be careful. Trust no one but me." She stared at the drive, a sense of dread creeping over her. What was on it that was so important? The next day, Jessica arrived at the office early, the USB drive burning a metaphorical hole in her bag. William was already there, his face set with determination. You brought it? He asked as she entered. Jessica nodded, handing him the drive. He inserted it into his computer and opened the files. A video began to play, a hidden camera recording of Nathan in a meeting with an unknown man, discussing offshore accounts and the exact methods he'd used to siphon money. This is it, William said, his voice filled with triumph. This is the evidence we need. Jessica leaned in, watching the video with a mixture of awe and unease. How did you get this? Let's just say I have resources, William replied cryptically. Now, we need to act fast. If Nathan catches wind of this, he'll disappear before we can stop him. By mid-afternoon, William had arranged a meeting with his legal team and a trusted journalist. Jessica sat silently in the corner as the professionals debated the best course of action. We release this to the press, but not before filing formal charges, one of the lawyers said. We need to ensure Nathan has no way to escape. William nodded. Do it, and make sure the media knows the full story. I want everyone to see the kind of man he really is. That evening, as Jessica prepared to leave, William stopped her. Jessica, wait. She turned, surprised by the intensity in his voice. I couldn't have done this without you, he said, his tone sincere. You've been my rock through all of this. Jessica smiled faintly. I just did what I thought was right. And that's why I trust you, William said. But this isn't over yet. Nathan won't go down quietly. I'm ready, Jessica said firmly. Whatever happens next, I'm with you. William's expression softened. Then let's finish this, together. Jessica entered the office early the next morning, her mind swirling with the weight of the USB drive's contents. The video evidence was damning, proof of Nathan Sterling's corruption laid bare. She felt both exhilarated and apprehensive, knowing that exposing Nathan would change everything. William was already in his office, pacing the floor with his phone pressed to his ear. He glanced up as she walked in and quickly ended the call. Jessica, he said, his voice sharp but controlled. The legal team is finalizing the charges. Once they're filed, the press will release the story. She nodded, setting her bag down. What's the timeline? By tomorrow morning, he replied, crossing his arms. But we need to keep this under wraps until then. If Nathan gets wind of what's happening, he'll run. Jessica hesitated, her stomach twisting. Do you think he already suspects something? William's jaw tightened. I don't know, but I wouldn't put anything past him. He's clever and dangerous. As the day unfolded, Jessica tried to focus on her tasks, but the atmosphere in the office was tense. It was as if everyone could feel the storm brewing, even if they didn't know the source. By mid-afternoon, she found herself in the break room, nursing a cup of coffee and trying to quiet her racing thoughts. Jessica, a voice said behind her. She turned to see Nathan Sterling standing in the doorway, his usual charming smile firmly in place. But something in his eyes made her uneasy. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. I hear you've been spending a lot of time with William, he said, his tone casual but laced with an edge. Jessica forced herself to remain calm. Just doing my job. Your new job, he emphasized, leaning against the counter. It's quite a leap, don't you think? From cleaning floors to being Montgomery's right hand. Impressive. Jessica met his gaze, refusing to let him intimidate her. I guess I have a knack for spotting things other people miss. Nathan's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing. Be careful, Jessica. You might find yourself in over your head. Before she could respond, he turned and walked out, leaving her heart pounding. It was clear. Nathan knew something was amiss. That evening, William called Jessica into his office. He was seated behind his desk, his face etched with worry. Nathan confronted me earlier, he said as she sat down. He knows we're onto him. Jessica's breath caught. What did he say? Nothing outright, William admitted, but he made it clear he's not going down without a fight. He's already started reaching out to our investors, trying to turn them against me. Jessica frowned. Can he do that? He'll try, William said. But if the charges are filed before he can manipulate anyone, his efforts will be useless. Jessica hesitated before asking, what if he retaliates? Not just professionally, but personally. William's expression darkened. He might. That's why I've doubled your security detail. I won't let him hurt you, Jessica. She nodded, appreciating his concern, but the unease in her chest didn't subside. The next morning, chaos erupted. As Jessica entered the office, she was met with hushed whispers and hurried footsteps. William's assistant Megan rushed up to her, cat clutching her tablet. "You need to see this," Megan said, pulling Jessica into a quiet corner. She showed her the screen, which displayed an article from a prominent news site. The headline read, "Montgomery Bank CEO accused of fraud. Allegations surface from anonymous source." Jessica's blood ran cold. "What? That's not true." "It's already everywhere," Megan said, her voice low. "The board is meeting in an hour to discuss it." Jessica stormed into William's office, finding him seated at his desk with his legal team. His face was a mask of anger and frustration. "He's flipped the narrative," William said, slamming a folder onto his desk. "Nathan leaked false accusations against me to discredit the evidence we have on him." Jessica sank into a chair, stunned. "Can he do that? Won't people see through it?" "It's a tactic," one of the lawyers explained. "He's trying to muddy the waters, make it a case of his word against yours." Jessica's mind raced. "There has to be something we can do. What about the video? It's undeniable proof." "We're working on it," William said, his voice tight. "But the damage is already done. We'll need more than just the video to clear this up." Jessica sat back, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on her. Nathan wasn't just trying to save himself. He was dragging them into the mud with him. That evening, as Jessica reviewed files in her apartment, her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "If you value your life, walk away from this." Her heart pounded as she stared at the message. She forwarded it to William immediately, her hands trembling. Seconds later, her phone rang. It was William. "Jessica, are you okay?" "I'm fine," she said, though her voice wavered. "But this is getting worse, isn't it?" There was a pause before William replied, his tone heavy. "Yes, but we're not backing down. Nathan's desperation only proves how close we are to taking him down." Jessica nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "What's the plan?" "Meet me at the office tomorrow morning," he said. "We're going to fight back." Jessica stood outside the courthouse, her heart pounding as reporters swarmed the front steps. Cameras flashed, and journalists shouted questions at William Montgomery, who walked ahead of her with his head held high. Dressed in a sharp navy suit, he exuded confidence, but Jessica could sense the tension in his posture. "Mr. Montgomery, are the allegations true?" One reporter called out. "Do you plan to step down as CEO?" Another shouted. William ignored them, his jaw clenched. He turned briefly to Jessica and whispered, "Stay close. They'll try to get to you, too." Jessica nodded, clutching her bag tightly. She had never been in a situation like this, and the chaos made her stomach churn. Inside, the courtroom was stark and imposing. The air buzzed with quiet murmurs as lawyers shuffled papers and attendees took their seats. On one side sat William's legal team, their expressions serious and focused. Across the aisle, Nathan Sterling lounged casually, his lawyer whispering something in his ear. Nathan smirked when his eyes landed on Jessica, sending a chill down her spine. William leaned toward her. "Don't let him intimidate you. He thrives on fear." Jessica swallowed and nodded. "I'm not afraid." The proceedings began with Nathan's attorney presenting his case. He painted Nathan as a victim, claiming that the accusations against him were fabricated by William in an attempt to cover up his own financial mismanagement. Jessica listened in disbelief as the lawyer twisted facts, presenting William as the true villain. "How can they get away with this?" she whispered to William. "They won't," he replied quietly. "Not once we present the video." When it was William's turn, his lead attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Victoria Hayes, stood confidently. "Your Honor," Victoria began, "the defense's claims are baseless. We have evidence that will unequivocally prove Nathan Sterling's guilt." She gestured to the projector screen at the front of the room. "This video, obtained through legal channels, shows Mr. Sterling conspiring to embezzle funds from Montgomery Bank." The room fell silent as the video played. Nathan's voice filled the courtroom, his smug tone impossible to deny as he discussed offshore accounts and illegal transactions. Jessica watched as his smirk disappeared, replaced by a mask of barely concealed panic. When the video ended, Victoria turned to the judge. "This evidence speaks for itself. Mr. Sterling's actions were not only unethical, but criminal." As the cross-examinations began, Nathan's lawyer tried to discredit the video, claiming it was doctored. Victoria, however, was prepared. "We have an independent forensic report confirming the authenticity of this recording," she stated, handing a document to the judge. Mr. Sterling's attempts to undermine the truth only highlight his guilt. Nathan was called to the stand, his demeanor shifting from confident to defensive under Victoria's relentless questioning. Mr. Sterling, she said, pacing in front of him, can you explain why your voice is clearly heard discussing embezzlement in this video? Nathan hesitated. It's taken out of context. Out of context? Victoria raised an eyebrow. So you're saying this detailed conversation about siphoning funds was somehow innocent? Nathan stammered, his facade cracking. I didn't mean it like that. And yet, Victoria pressed, the accounts you mentioned in the video correspond exactly to the missing funds from Montgomery Bank. How do you explain that? Sweat beaded on Nathan's forehead. I wasn't aware of the details. It was a misunderstanding. The courtroom buzzed with whispers, the tide clearly turning against him. During a recess, Jessica stepped outside for air, her hands shaking from the intensity of the trial. William joined her, his expression calm but determined. You're doing great, he said. I'm not doing anything, she replied, her voice trembling. Yes, you are, he insisted. You're here. That means more than you realize. Jessica met his gaze, finding strength in his confidence. Do you think it'll be enough? The video? It has to be, William said. But even if it isn't, we'll keep fighting. We're not going to let him win. As the trial resumed, the judge addressed the courtroom. After reviewing the evidence and hearing the testimonies, it is clear that Mr. Sterling's actions were deliberate and calculated. This court finds him guilty of embezzlement. The words relaxing for the first time in weeks. Nathan, however, was escorted out of the courtroom, his expression twisted with fury. As he passed Jessica, he hissed, "This isn't over." She froze, but William stepped between them, his voice steady. "Yes, it is." Outside the courthouse, the reporters swarmed again, but this time the questions were celebratory. "Mr. Montgomery, how does it feel to clear your name? What's next for Montgomery Bank?" William smiled faintly, addressing the crowd. "Today's decision is a victory for justice and integrity. My focus now is on rebuilding trust with our clients, our investors, and our team." As the reporters shifted their attention, William turned to Jessica. "Let's go. We've got work to do." Jessica nodded, following him into the waiting car. As they drove away, she allowed herself a small smile. The battle was over, but the fight to rebuild had just begun, and this time she was ready for it. The morning after the trial, Jessica walked into Montgomery Bank headquarters feeling a mix of exhaustion and hope. The air in the office seemed lighter, as though a storm had finally passed. Employees who had avoided eye contact for weeks now offered tentative smiles, and the tension that had gripped the building for months began to lift. Jessica found William in his office, standing by the window with a cup of coffee. He turned as she entered, his expression softening. "Good morning," he said. "How are you holding up?" "I should be asking you that," she replied with a small smile. "You just won a huge battle." William chuckled, though the sound was tinged with weariness. "One battle, yes, but the war isn't over. Nathan may be out of the picture, but the damage he caused will take years to repair." Jessica sat down, setting her notebook on the desk. "Where do we start?" William took a sip of his coffee, his gaze thoughtful. "We rebuild, slowly, carefully, and with transparency. The board is already on edge, and we need to reassure our investors that the company is stable." Jessica nodded. "What about the staff? Morale has been low for months." "Good point," William said. "We'll need to address that too. I was thinking of holding a company-wide meeting to lay everything out. No secrets, no spin." "That's a good idea," Jessica said. "People will appreciate the honesty." William smiled, a rare expression of genuine warmth. "You've been a big part of getting us here, Jessica. Don't think I've forgotten that." Later that day, Jessica joined William in the main conference room as employees filed in. The murmurs of curiosity and concern filled the space. Once everyone was seated, William stood at the head of the room, his presence commanding attention. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "I won't waste your time with a long speech. You all know what this company has been through over the past few months. I won't sugarcoat it. We were betrayed by someone we trusted. But thanks to the hard work of this team and the courage of a few key individuals, we've exposed the truth." Jessica felt a flush of pride as his eyes briefly met hers. "Now," William continued, "it's time to move forward. We're implementing new oversight measures to ensure something like this never happens again. But more importantly, I want each of you to know that this company's strength doesn't come from its name or its assets. It comes from you, your dedication, your talent, your trust. That's what will see us through. The room erupted in applause, and Jessica saw several employees exchange nods and smiles. For the first time in a long while, hope filled the air. After the meeting, Jessica returned to her desk to find a note from William. Meet me in the study room. We need to discuss the next steps. When she arrived, William was already there, leaning over a spread of papers on the table. He looked up as she entered. I've been thinking about how we can restore trust with our clients, he said. We need to show them that we're not just fixing the problems, but actively improving. A charity initiative could help, a way to give back to the community. That's a great idea, Jessica said. What kind of initiative? Financial literacy programs, William said, his tone growing animated. We teach people how to manage their money, avoid predatory loans, and plan for the future. It would align with our mission and rebuild goodwill. Jessica's face lit up. I love it. I can start researching potential partners and organizing a launch event. William nodded. Good. I want this to be your project, Jessica. You've earned it. Her eyes widened. Mine? Are you sure? I trust you, he said simply. You've proven yourself time and again. This is your chance to step into a bigger role. Jessica felt a surge of both excitement and nerves. Thank you. I won't let you down. I know you won't, William said with a smile. In the weeks that followed, Jessica threw herself into the project. She met with nonprofit organizations, planned workshops, and worked with the marketing team to craft a campaign that highlighted the company's commitment to positive change. The initiative was named Future First, and it quickly gained momentum. The launch event was held in a packed auditorium, with reporters, community leaders, and clients in attendance. Jessica stood backstage, nerves buzzing as she prepared to deliver a speech about the program's goals. William appeared beside her, his presence steadying. You're going to do great, he said. Just speak from the heart. Jessica nodded, taking a deep breath before stepping onto the stage. The applause was overwhelming, but she focused on the faces in the crowd and began. Thank you all for being here, she said. This program is more than just an initiative. It's a promise. A promise that Montgomery Bank is committed to rebuilding trust, not just with numbers on a ledger, but with real, meaningful action. We want to empower individuals and families to take control of their financial futures. Because when we lift each other up, we all rise. The crowd erupted in applause, and Jessica felt a wave of pride wash over her. As she stepped off the stage, William was waiting. You were incredible, he said, his smile warm and genuine. Thank you, Jessica replied, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline still coursing through her. But I couldn't have done it without you. William shook his head. Don't sell yourself short. This was your vision, and it's just the beginning. As they walked back into the crowd, Jessica felt a sense of fulfillment she had never known. The trials of the past months had been grueling, but they had led to something bigger, a chance to make a real difference. And for the first time, she saw a future where she wasn't just a part of someone else's story, but was writing her own. Jessica stood in the middle of the bustling office, watching as employees buzzed with renewed energy. The success of the Future First initiative had breathed life back into Montgomery Bank, and she felt a deep sense of accomplishment. Yet, as the days passed, she couldn't shake the growing connection between her and William. It was unspoken, subtle, shared glances, lingering conversations, but undeniable. Late one evening, Jessica stayed behind to organize reports from the charity launch. She was deep in concentration when William's voice startled her. Burning the midnight oil again? He said, stepping into the room. Jessica looked up, smiling despite the exhaustion. Someone has to keep things running smoothly. William chuckled, walking over to her desk. You've been doing more than that. The board hasn't stopped praising your work on the initiative. Jessica blushed, looking down at her papers. It wasn't just me. A lot of people helped. True, William said, leaning against the desk, but none of it would have happened without your leadership. Jessica hesitated, her heart pounding as she felt his gaze linger. I just wanted to make a difference. You've done more than that, he said softly. You've changed this place, changed me. Jessica's breath caught. The weight of his words hung between them, unspoken feelings simmering just beneath the surface. She tried to focus on her work, but the intensity of the moment was impossible to ignore. I, I should finish these reports, she said, her voice faltering. William nodded, though he didn't move. Of course, but Jessica, she looked up, meeting his eyes. I just want you to know how much I value you, he said, his tone sincere. Not just for what you've done for the company, but for who you are. Jessica felt a rush of emotion she couldn't quite place. Thank you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. That means a lot. The next day, Jessica tried to shake the conversation from her mind, but it lingered like a melody she couldn't stop humming. As she worked, Megan, one of the junior staff members, leaned over her desk with a sly grin. Is it just me, or does Mr. Montgomery seem extra attentive to you lately? Megan teased. Jessica nearly dropped her pen. What? No, that's ridiculous. Megan raised an eyebrow. Oh, come on, everyone sees it. The way he looks at you, the way he talks to you. It's obvious. Jessica's cheeks burned. He's my boss, Megan. That's all. Sure, Megan said, smirking. Whatever you say. Jessica tried to brush off the comment, but the seed had been planted. Could Megan be right? Was there more between her and William than just professional respect? That evening, Jessica found herself in the company lounge, sipping a cup of tea and staring out at the city lights. The quiet hum of the building was soothing, and she let herself relax for the first time in days. Mind if I join you? William's voice broke the silence. Jessica turned to see him standing in the doorway, holding a coffee cup. She nodded, and he took a seat across from her. It's rare to see you take a break, he said with a small smile. Even I need a moment to breathe sometimes, she replied, returning his smile. They sat in companionable silence for a moment before William spoke again. I've been meaning to ask, how are you holding up? After everything with Nathan, the trial, the initiative, it's been a lot, Jessica shrugged. It has, but I think I'm doing okay. It's been fulfilling in a way. To know that I'm part of something bigger. William nodded, his expression thoughtful. You've become more than just a part of it, Jessica. You've become the heart of it. Jessica looked away, trying to steady her emotions. You give me too much credit. No, William said firmly. I don't think I give you enough. Jessica met his eyes, and for a moment, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Jessica, William said softly, leaning forward. I know this might be crossing a line, but I can't ignore what I feel anymore. Her heart raced. William, he held up a hand, stopping her. You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know. You mean more to me than just a colleague or a friend, but I also understand if this is too complicated. Jessica sat in stunned silence, her emotions a whirlwind of confusion and hope. Finally, she found her voice. I care about you too, she admitted. But this isn't simple. You're my boss, and there's so much at stake. I know, William said, his voice steady. That's why I'm willing to wait, Tant. I don't want to pressure you, Jessica. I just want you to know how I feel. Jessica nodded, her chest tightening with a mix of fear and excitement. Thank you for being honest. I need time to think. William smiled gently. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. As he stood to leave, Jessica watched him go, her mind racing. She had spent so long focusing on survival, on proving herself, that she hadn't allowed herself to think about what she wanted, what she felt. Now, for the first time, she realized that her future might hold more than she ever thought possible. Jessica paced the length of her apartment, her thoughts a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. William's confession had shaken her more than she cared to admit. She had spent so long keeping her head down, blending into the background, that the idea of someone, especially someone like William, seeing her as more than just an employee felt almost surreal. Yet, the truth was undeniable. She felt something for him too. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from William. No pressure, but if you're free for lunch tomorrow, I'd like to talk. Just us. Jessica stared at the screen, her heart pounding. After a moment's hesitation, she typed back, Okay. Noon? The next day, Jessica arrived at a quiet cafe William had chosen, far from the prying eyes of the office. He was already there, sitting at a corner table, his usual commanding presence softened by the casual setting. When he saw her, he stood, offering a warm smile. Jessica, he said, pulling out a chair for her. Thank you for coming. She sat down, trying to ignore the fluttering in her chest. You didn't give me much choice, she joked lightly. He chuckled. Fair enough. But I meant it when I said there's no pressure. I just wanted to talk about everything. Jessica nodded, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of her glass of water. I've been thinking a lot since our conversation. About us. William leaned forward, his expression earnest. And? I care about you, William, she admitted, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions beneath. But this is complicated. You're my boss. If people found out, they'll talk, he interrupted gently. They always do. But I don't care about the gossip, Jessica. What matters to me is how you feel. Jessica looked down, her thoughts swirling. I feel confused, torn. I've spent my whole life trying to prove I'm more than just the cleaner. And now I'm finally in a position where I'm respected. I don't want to ruin that. William reached across the table, his hand brushing hers. You've already proven yourself, Jessica, to everyone. No one can take that away from you. Not even me. Whatever happens between us, it won't change what you've accomplished. Jessica met his gaze, her heart softening at the sincerity in his eyes. I just need time, William, to figure out what I want, what's right. He nodded, withdrawing his hand. Take all the time you need. I mean that. I don't want to rush you into anything. They finished their lunch with lighter conversation, but the undercurrent of their feelings remained, a quiet tension that neither could ignore. Back at the office, Jessica threw herself into work, trying to push her emotions aside. But as the weeks passed, her connection with William grew harder to ignore. They worked late together more often, their conversations shifting from professional to personal, revealing pieces of their lives they hadn't shared before. One evening, as they reviewed proposals for a new branch of the Future First initiative, Jessica found herself laughing at one of William's rare jokes. The sound was warm, genuine, and it made him pause. I like hearing you laugh, he said, his voice soft. Jessica looked at him, her smile fading as the weight of their unspoken feelings settled over them again. William, he shook his head, holding up a hand. I know, I promised I wouldn't push. I want you to know how much I admire you, not just for your work, but for who you are. Jessica felt a lump rise in her throat. You're making this really hard, you know? I know, he admitted, his own smile tinged with sadness. But you're worth it. The turning point came one afternoon when Megan burst into Jessica's office, a wide grin on her face. Have you seen the latest numbers? Jessica frowned, confused. What numbers? The feedback from the first round of Future First workshops, Megan said, handing her a printout. People are loving it. Attendance is through the roof, and the testimonials are incredible. Jessica scanned the document, her chest swelling with pride. This is amazing. It's all because of you. Megan said, you should be proud. Jessica nodded, but her thoughts drifted to William. He had given her this opportunity, believed in her when no one else had. For all her fears and doubts, she realized that he wasn't just her boss. He was her partner, in every sense of the word. That evening, Jessica found herself outside William's office. She knocked softly, and his voice called out, come in. He looked up from his desk, surprised to see her. Jessica, what's... Pop, she closed the door behind her, cutting him off. I've made a decision. William stood, his expression cautious. And? She took a deep breath, her heart pounding. I want to try. With you, but only if we're careful, if we can keep things professional at work. His face lit up with a rare, genuine smile. Of course, whatever makes you comfortable. Jessica stepped closer, her nerves fading as she saw the happiness in his eyes. This isn't going to be easy. Nothing worth having ever is, he said, his voice steady. For the first time in weeks, Jessica felt at peace. The road ahead might be uncertain, but she was ready to face it, with William by her side. The office hummed with quiet activity as Jessica walked down the hall, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. She felt a sense of clarity she hadn't known in months. Her decision to be with William had been anything but easy, but as she entered his office and saw him waiting for her with that familiar mixture of confidence and warmth, she knew she had made the right choice. Morning, he said, looking up from his laptop with a smile that made her heart skip. Morning, she replied, setting a stack of reports on his desk. Ready for another day of saving the world? Saving the world? He teased, leaning back in his chair. I thought we were just running a bank. Jessica smirked. You underestimate the power of Future First. I've been reviewing the latest impact reports. The program's reaching more people than we ever expected. That's all because of you. William said, his tone sincere. You turned a concept into something real, something that's changing lives. Jessica's cheeks flushed, but she waved him off. It's a team effort. Besides, you were the one who trusted me with it. And I don't regret it for a second, he said, his voice softening. Just like I don't regret trusting you with everything else. The moment hung between them, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond they had forged. Jessica felt a pang of nervousness, but met his gaze, her resolve steady. Speaking of trust, she said, changing the subject slightly, I've been thinking about the expansion plans. We need to be strategic about where we open the next round of workshops. William nodded, leaning forward. Agreed. Let's go over the proposals together. Hours later, after countless discussions and spreadsheets, Jessica and William emerged from his office to find Megan waiting for them with an excited grin. You two need to see this, she said, holding up her tablet. Jessica took the device, her eyes widening as she read the screen. It was an article from a prominent financial magazine, headlined, Montgomery Bank's Future First initiative sets new standard for corporate responsibility. They're calling it the gold standard for community engagement, Megan said. This could be huge for us. Jessica handed the tablet to William, who skimmed the article with a satisfied smile. This is exactly the kind of recognition we needed, he said. Great work, Jessica. Jessica shook her head. Great work, team. This wouldn't have been possible without everyone's effort. Megan gave her a knowing look. You're too modest. That evening, Jessica and William attended a gala celebrating corporate contributions to community development. The room was filled with industry leaders, philanthropists, and media representatives. Jessica felt slightly out of place in her elegant black gown, but William stayed by her side, his presence reassuring. As they moved through the crowd, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries, Jessica couldn't help but notice the subtle glances people gave them. Whispers followed in their wake, speculation buzzing in the air. People are starting to talk, she said quietly to William as they stood near the bar. Let them, he replied, his tone steady. We have nothing to hide. Jessica hesitated. I just don't want it to overshadow the work we're doing. It won't, William assured her. You've built something too strong for gossip to tear down. Besides, anyone who knows you will see the truth. You're the reason this company is thriving. Jessica smiled, touched by his words. You always know what to say, don't you? It's a gift, he said with a playful smirk. As the night wound down, William escorted Jessica to her car. The city lights shimmered around them, casting a warm glow over the quiet street. Tonight was a success, he said, holding the door open for her. Because of you. Jessica looked up at him, her heart full. Because of us. We've come a long way, haven't we? William nodded, his expression soft. We have. And this is just the beginning. Jessica stepped closer, her voice steady. Whatever comes next, I'm ready, as long as we're in it together. William reached for her hand, his touch gentle but firm. Always. As Jessica drove away, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The challenges ahead would be many, but for the first time she felt truly prepared to face them. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving, building a future she could be proud of, alongside someone who believed in her as much as she believed in herself. It was, at last, a new beginning.